The dining knife hovers over pork belly, steam rising from the bonchons spread across Min Jae's bistro counter as Janelle Peterson stares at what should be comfort food. Instead, she's watching 30 strangers witness her childhood trauma served on ceramic plates. "This is Grandma Johnson's memory," Min Jae announces to the Table, Memory, and Word extension course audience, his voice carrying the pride of a chef who thinks he's captured lightning. Sweet potato mash with secret spices, cardamom, cinnamon, love from the American South. The cardamom. He found the cardamom. Janelle's throat closes. Not because it's wrong, but because it's devastatingly right. Her grandmother made exactly this dish, but with cardamom she bought in shame, spice too fancy, for a poor black woman in 1960s Chicago. The ingredient that made her grandmother feel like she was stealing dignity 1 teaspoon at a time. The audience applauds. Someone whispers about cultural bridge building and authentic tribute. Min Jae's eyes find hers across the crowded bistro, expecting gratitude, appreciation, connection. Instead, Janelle sets down her chopsticks with surgical precision. "Don't," she says quietly, but her voice cuts through the warm chatter like winter wind. "Don't ever ask me about my family again." She walks out the back door, leaving behind her leather notebook, her dignity, and the debris of a partnership that just exploded before it could begin. But Min Jae does something unprecedented in his 45 years of controlled perfectionism. He follows her into the Seoul rain, abandoning a dining room full of paying customers to chase after a woman whose pain he doesn't understand, but somehow can't ignore. "Wait," he calls out, his chef's whites soaking through in the downpour. "Help me understand what I did wrong. Most of you listening aren't subscribed to our channel yet, but stories like this one, about real healing and second chances at love, take time to research and craft with the depth they deserve. If this beginning resonates with you, hit subscribe to encourage us to write more mature love stories that honor the complexity of starting over at 40. What happens when pride meets vulnerability? When good intentions collide with unhealed wounds? Can two people who've failed at love before learn to build something that lasts? 3 days before the catastrophic dinner, Janelle had walked into Seoul National University's Extension Program office carrying 42 years of accumulated defense mechanisms and a proposal that sounded better on paper than it felt in practice. "Table, memory, and word," she explained to Dr. So. Sarah Kim, the program coordinator whose geometric glasses and tailored suit suggested someone who valued precision over sentiment. Food as emotional archaeology. Students share family recipes, explore the stories behind comfort foods, use culinary memory as creative writing prompts. Innovative, Dr. Kim acknowledged, though her tone suggested evaluation rather than enthusiasm. "And you have a culinary partner?" "Not yet. The proposal mentions incorporating Seoul's restaurant scene, but I have someone in mind." Dr. Kim was already reaching for her phone. Min Jae Park owns a bistro in Seocheon, trained at Le Cordon Bleu, worked in hotel kitchens, now specializes in modern Korean fusion with international influences. What Dr. Kim didn't mention was that Min Jae had walked away from a 5-star hotel career after a breakdown that nearly killed him. What she didn't know was that Janelle's last attempt at professional partnership had ended with her previous university, gently suggesting she take a sabbatical after her second divorce imploded publicly enough to become departmental gossip. What neither woman anticipated was that two people carrying invisible wounds would recognize something familiar in each other's careful distance. The bistro meeting happened on a Tuesday afternoon, when Seoul's autumn light slanted through Seocheon's narrow streets like honey. Min Jae's restaurant occupied a renovated hanok, traditional Korean architecture softened with modern lighting, and exactly 30 seats arranged with mathematical precision. Janelle arrived early, her leather notebook clutched like armor, observing the controlled chaos of lunch service winding down. Min-jae moved through his kitchen with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd learned that perfectionism was the only acceptable alternative to failure. "Professor Peterson?" His English carried a slight accent, formal and careful. Up close, he was older than his photos suggested, silver threading through black hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of exhaustion rather than laughter. "I apologize for the delay. Service ran longer than anticipated." "No problem. I appreciate you taking time to discuss the partnership." They sat at a corner table, her academic proposition spread between them like a treaty negotiation. The extension course would meet twice weekly for 8 weeks. Students would explore family food traditions, write creative pieces inspired by taste memory, share stories that connected personal history to cultural identity. "Your role," Janelle explained, "would be facilitating the culinary component. Teaching basic techniques, helping students prepare meaningful dishes, providing cultural context for Korean ingredients and methods." Min-jae studied the proposal with professional focus. "The compensation seems fair. Timeline is manageable. But I have questions about the emotional component." "Such as?" "Food triggers powerful responses. Family recipes carry trauma as often as comfort. What happens when students share stories they're not prepared to process?" The question revealed more about Min-jae than any resume could. This wasn't someone who viewed cooking as mere technique. He understood food as emotional archaeology, dangerous excavation that could unearth treasures or explosives without warning. "We established boundaries from the beginning," Janelle said. "Clear consent about sharing levels. No pressure to reveal more than feels safe. And if someone shares something that triggers other participants, we create space for multiple truths to coexist. Acknowledge that the same recipe might represent love for one person, loss for another." Min-jae nodded slowly. "I accept the partnership, but I have one condition." "Which is?" "Authenticity over performance. If we're asking students to be vulnerable about family history, we model that vulnerability ourselves. No sanitized stories, no comfortable lies." Janelle extended her hand across the table. "Agreed." The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds. Professional, careful, revealing nothing about the fact that both their palms were slightly damp with the nervousness of people who'd learned not to trust easily. What neither of them realized was that they'd just committed to 8 weeks of supervised emotional demolition, with 30 strangers as witnesses, and no real plan for what to do with the debris. Min-jae interrupts service the next evening, walking into his bustling dining room at 7:30 p.m., with the focused determination of someone who's made a decision that will change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, his voice carrying over conversations in 3 languages. "I need your attention for a moment." The bistro falls quiet. Diners pause mid-bite. Servers freeze with plates balanced on their arms, and Ji-hoon, his sous chef, stares from the kitchen doorway with open concern. "Last night, I made a significant mistake. I prepared a dish intended as tribute without properly listening to the story behind it. I hurt someone I respect deeply, someone who trusted me with family history that I treated carelessly." A few customers glance toward the door, as if expecting a dramatic confrontation. Instead, Min-jae continues with the methodical precision he applies to every aspect of his professional life. Professor Janelle Peterson is a brilliant educator who came to Korea to create something meaningful with Seoul's culinary community. Instead of supporting her vision, I imposed my own assumptions. I let my desire to impress override my responsibility to honor what she was sharing. The bistro's atmosphere shifts. Intimate strangers drawn into something unexpectedly authentic. This isn't the polished apology of damage control. It's the raw admission of someone willing to be wrong publicly. Tomorrow evening, if she's willing to give me another chance, we'll be preparing her grandmother's recipe together. The real version, with all the stories and struggles it carries. You're welcome to join us, but only if you come prepared to listen more than you speak. Min-jae bows slightly, a gesture that bridges Korean formality with personal humility. Thank you for your understanding. Please continue enjoying your meals. The response is immediate and electric. Instead of awkward silence, the dining room erupts in appreciation. Applause from the Korean customers, raised wine glasses from international diners, and the kind of energized conversation that happens when people witness genuine courage. Ji-hoon approaches as Min-jae returns to the kitchen. Hyung, he says quietly, using the Korean term for older brother that carries affection along with respect. In 15 years of working with you, I've never seen you apologize. Not once. Not even when you were wrong. I've never been this wrong before. Or this interested in being right for someone else. The observation hangs between them as Min-jae begins prep for the evening's remaining service. But his movements lack their usual mechanical precision. There's something looser, more intuitive, as if the public admission has freed him from the rigid perfectionism that's defined his career. Across Seoul, Janelle sits in her small apartment near Hongdae, staring at a text message from an unknown number. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. if you're willing. We'll do this properly. No assumptions, no shortcuts. Just listening. Min-jae Park. She stares at the message for 20 minutes, her finger hovering over the reply button. Pride wars with curiosity, professional necessity battles personal vulnerability. Finally, she types, "Bring your notebook. We're going to talk before we cook." The response comes immediately. Already prepared 3 pages of questions, none of them about ingredients. Despite everything, the public humiliation, the triggered trauma, the carefully constructed walls around her family history, Janelle finds herself smiling for the first time in 3 days. Maybe some mistakes are worth the risk of repairing. The second attempt takes place not in the bistro's public dining room, but in Min-jae's private kitchen after hours. The space feels different in the evening quiet, more intimate, less performative, with soft lighting that suggests conversation rather than critique. Janelle arrives carrying her grandmother's recipe box, a battered wooden container she hasn't opened in 5 years. Min-jae waits at the steel prep counter, his chef's knife set aside, a legal pad filled with careful handwriting positioned between them. "Before we cook anything," he says, "I need to understand what I got wrong. Everything." Janelle's voice carries no anger now, just exhaustion. "You researched American Southern cuisine and made assumptions about what comfort food means to Black families. You took our survival and turned it into performance. Explain that to me." She opens the recipe box, revealing index cards yellowed with age and food stains. "My grandmother, Dorothy Johnson, cleaned houses for white families in Chicago in the 1960s. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that barely covered rent." Min-jae listens without interrupting. His professional focus shifted entirely to her words rather than technique. But she loved to cook. Loved taking cheap ingredients and transforming them into something that made our tiny kitchen feel like celebration. Sweet potatoes were affordable, filling, could stretch to feed whoever needed a meal. Janelle pulls out a specific card. Her grandmother's handwriting faded, but still legible. The cardamom wasn't traditional. Wasn't part of any family recipe passed down through generations. She discovered it by accident when she was cleaning a spice merchant's house, found a discarded container they were throwing away. She took it. She asked if she could have it. The woman gave it to her like charity, like she was doing this poor Black woman a favor by letting her have the exotic spice nobody wanted. Janelle's fingers traced the recipe card's edges. But Grandma Dorothy fell in love with that flavor. Started buying cardamom with grocery money she couldn't afford to spend on anything fancy. Understanding dawns in Min-jae's eyes. She felt guilty for wanting something beautiful. She felt guilty for wanting anything beyond survival, but she couldn't help herself. That cardamom made her sweet potatoes taste like hope instead of just necessity. The kitchen falls quiet, except for the distant hum of Seoul traffic. Min-jae processes the story, understanding now that his tribute had captured the flavor without honoring the sacrifice, the complexity, the private joy that his grandmother had guarded like a precious secret. "What happened to her?" he asks gently. "Lung cancer when I was 15. The day she died, she asked me to promise I'd never let anyone make me feel ashamed for wanting beautiful things." Janelle looks up from the recipe card. "And here I am, 42 years old, letting a chef I barely know serve my family's private pain to strangers as entertainment. That's not what I intended." "I know, but intentions don't always protect against impact." Min-jae reaches for his knife, then stops. "Would you teach me? The real recipe with all the stories it carries? Not for the extension course, not for an audience. Just for my own understanding." Janelle studies his face, looking for performative sympathy or professional calculation. Instead, she finds genuine curiosity, the rare willingness of someone prepared to be changed by what they learn. "The cardamom goes in at the end," she says, opening the spice container she's brought from home. "After the sweet potatoes are perfectly smooth, after the butter and milk have been folded in with patience instead of efficiency. You add it like prayer, carefully, intentionally, with full awareness of what it costs." They work side by side for the next hour, Min-jae's technical skills guided by Janelle's emotional knowledge. She teaches him about the specific sweetness that balances cardamom's intensity, about the texture that comes from hand mashing rather than mechanical processing, about the way certain spices carry memory across decades and continents. "It's beautiful," Min-jae says when they finally taste the finished dish together. "Complex in ways I didn't understand before. My grandmother would have liked you," Janelle says quietly. "She always said the best cooks were the ones willing to learn from their mistakes." They eat in comfortable silence, two people sharing something that's transformed from professional collaboration into unexpected intimacy. Outside, Seoul settles into its evening rhythm. But inside the quiet kitchen, a Black woman professor and a Korean chef are discovering that some bridges take time to build properly. "The extension course," Min-jae says eventually. "Tomorrow night. Are you ready?" "Are you?" Janelle looks at her grandmother's recipe box, then at the empty plates between them. "With the right partner? Yes." They shake hands again. But this time, it feels less like a business agreement and more like the beginning of something neither of them is quite ready to name. Week 3 of the extension course brings an assignment that makes everyone in the room visibly uncomfortable, writing letters to their 25-year-old selves, guided by a specific family recipe. "Choose a dish that represents who you thought you'd become," Janelle explains to the circle of students gathered in the bistro's reconfigured dining space. "Write to that younger version of yourself. Explain what the recipe means now, what you've learned about the distance between expectation and reality." The participants, a mix of Seoul residents, expat professionals, and university students, shift in their chairs. This isn't the comfortable cultural exchange they signed up for. This is emotional archaeology with witness protection. "I'll demonstrate," Min-jae says, surprising everyone, including Janelle. He moves to the kitchen's demonstration station, pulling out ingredients for what appears to be an elaborate French technique. Coq au vin, classic preparation, taught to me by a chef in Paris when I was 28. His hands work with automatic precision, breaking down the chicken, preparing the aromatic base, setting up multiple pans with the choreographed efficiency of professional service. "At 25, I thought mastery meant perfection," he continues, his voice carrying over the sound of onions hitting hot oil. "I believed that if I could execute every classical technique flawlessly, I would earn respect, recognition, the kind of culinary reputation that outlasts trends." Janelle watches him work, recognizing something in his careful movements, the way perfectionism becomes both shield and prison. "Dear 25-year-old Min-jae," he says, beginning to brown the chicken pieces. "You think success means never failing, never showing weakness, never needing help from anyone. You're going to spend 15 years proving how self-sufficient you can be. The bistro falls completely silent. Even the usual sounds of Seoul traffic seem muted, as if the city itself is leaning in to listen. You'll work 18-hour days in hotel kitchens where head chefs throw plates when you make mistakes. You'll smile through verbal abuse because you think endurance equals strength. You'll sacrifice friendships, relationships, your physical and mental health, all for the approval of people who will never see you as anything more than competent. The chicken sizzles as Min-jae adds wine to deglaze the pan, steam rising like incense in the warm kitchen air. And one day, you'll be standing in a 5-star hotel kitchen in Gangnam, preparing for the most important service of your career, when your hands will start shaking so badly you can't hold a knife. You'll tell yourself it's exhaustion, stress, too much caffeine, but it won't stop. Several students lean forward, drawn into confession that's become more intimate than any cooking demonstration should be. The panic attack will hit during the dinner rush. 300 covers, full dining room, Michelin reviewers at table 12. You'll collapse behind the garde-manger station, gasping for air, convinced you're dying. And the head chef will step over you to keep service running, because that's what you taught everyone to expect, that the work matters more than the person doing it. Min-jae adds herbs to the braising liquid, his movements slowing as memory intersects with technique. So here's what I wish I could tell you. 25-year-old Min-jae. Perfection is not the same as excellence. Isolation is not the same as independence. And the people worth knowing will love you more for your struggles than for your successes. He covers the pot, reducing the heat to a gentle simmer. This dish taught me patience, but it took me 15 years to understand that patience includes being gentle with yourself while you learn. The room sits in stunned silence. This level of vulnerability wasn't in the course syllabus, but it's exactly what the assignment was designed to evoke. The courage to examine the distance between who we thought we'd become and who we actually are. Janelle realizes it's her turn to model the exercise. She moves to her own workspace, pulling out ingredients for what appears to be a simple cornbread recipe. "My turn," she says, her voice steadier than she feels. Dear 25-year-old Janelle, you think intelligence will protect you from making stupid decisions about love? The confession comes easier than she expected. Perhaps because Min-jae's honesty has created permission for everyone in the room to be equally real. You're going to marry someone who looks good on paper, educated, ambitious, shares your academic interests. You'll mistake compatibility for connection, shared goals for shared values. And you'll spend 8 years trying to fix a relationship that was broken from the beginning because neither of you was brave enough to admit you didn't actually like each other. She measures cornmeal with the automatic precision of someone who's made this recipe hundreds of times. Then you'll do it again. Different person, same mistake. You'll choose safety over authenticity. Convince yourself that settling is mature. That compromise means sacrificing the parts of yourself that feel too much, want too much, dream too foolishly. The batter comes together quickly, but Janelle's hands slow as she approaches the difficult part of the story. And you'll end up 40 years old, twice divorced, sitting in faculty meetings where colleagues whisper about your personal instability while you nod and pretend their opinions don't matter. You'll volunteer for international assignments not because you love travel, but because running away feels easier than staying in one place long enough for people to see how badly you've failed at the things that should come naturally. She pours the batter into a cast iron skillet, the same type her grandmother used, inherited through generations of women who learned to make beauty from whatever ingredients they could afford. But here's what you need to know, 25-year-old me. Those failures will teach you more about love than your successes ever could. The marriages that didn't work will show you what you actually need from a partner. The loneliness will teach you to enjoy your own company. And the mistakes will give you compassion for other people's imperfect choices. The cornbread goes into the oven, filling the bistro with the warm smell of comfort food that transcends cultural boundaries. This recipe represents home to me, Janelle continues. Not perfect home, not Instagram-worthy home, but real home. The place where your mistakes are acknowledged without shame. Where growing up means getting better at loving yourself and others. Not just getting better at hiding your weaknesses. When both dishes are ready, the entire group shares the meal in contemplative quiet. The coq au vin is technically flawless, complex, and sophisticated. The cornbread is simple, honest, deeply satisfying. Together they represent two approaches to nourishment, one earned through struggle, one inherited through love. Next week, Janelle announces as students prepare to leave, bring a recipe that represents forgiveness, either forgiving someone else or learning to forgive yourself. After the bistro empties, Min-jae and Janelle clean the kitchen together in comfortable silence. The evening feels different somehow, less like professional collaboration, more like intimate friendship. That was harder than I expected, Min-jae admits, drying the last of the dishes. But necessary. Do you think they'll come back next week? All of them. What you did tonight, sharing your panic attack story, that gave everyone permission to be real. That's what people are actually hungry for. Min-jae hangs up his dish towel, turning to face her. And you? What are you hungry for, Janelle Peterson? The question hangs in the warm air between them, loaded with implications neither of them is quite ready to explore. Outside, Seoul's neon lights paint the streets in promises and possibilities. But inside the quiet bistro, two people are discovering that the most dangerous ingredient in any recipe is hope. I'm learning, she says finally, gathering her grandmother's recipe box. Ask me again in a few weeks. But as she walks through the cooling Seoul night toward her apartment, Janelle realizes she already knows the answer. She's hungry for connection that doesn't require performance, partnership that honors both strength and vulnerability, love that grows stronger through honesty rather than despite it. The question is whether she's brave enough to reach for it. Saturday morning in Tongan Market arrives with the chaos of authentic Seoul, vendors calling out prices in rapid-fire Korean, tourists navigating narrow aisles with translation apps, and the rich symphony of smells that makes every food market feel like coming home to someone's kitchen. Janelle meets Min-jae at the market entrance, both carrying canvas bags, and the slightly awkward awareness that this shopping trip isn't quite professional anymore. After 3 weeks of supervised vulnerability in the extension course, they've moved past colleague status into something unnamed, but increasingly complicated. The assignment is ambitious, Min-jae says, as they navigate through the seafood section, past vendors arranging displays of mackerel and octopus with artistic precision. Fusion dishes that honor both Korean and American traditions without appropriating or diminishing either. Culture shock on a plate, Janelle agrees. Students pick one Korean ingredient they've never used, pair it with something that reminds them of home, create something that represents their experience of being between worlds. They pause at a banchan vendor, studying the colorful array of pickled vegetables, fermented treasures that represent generations of Korean preservation techniques. What about us? Min-jae asks. We should model the assignment. What would you choose? He considers the question while examining gochujang, the complex fermented chili paste that forms the backbone of Korean flavoring. Something that bridges my classical French training with my Korean heritage. Something that acknowledges both influences without betraying either. That sounds personal. Everything about this course has become personal. The admission comes easily now. 3 weeks into a collaboration that's taught them both the difference between professional partnership and genuine intimacy. They move deeper into the market, through sections dedicated to dried goods, fresh produce, the kind of ingredients that require cultural knowledge to use properly. Janelle stops at a spice vendor, drawn to unfamiliar containers filled with aromatic powders and dried chilies. This, she says, holding up a small bag of Korean perilla seeds. I have no idea what to do with these, but they smell like possibility. Perilla is contentious, Min-jae explains, taking the bag to examine the seeds more closely. Some people love it, others find it overwhelming. Very distinct flavor, somewhere between mint and sesame, with a slight bitterness that either enhances or destroys everything it touches. Sounds like my relationship history. The joke lands lighter than intended, earning a genuine laugh from Min-jae. What would you pair it with? Something from home, something that represents comfort but also complication. She considers the market around them, the abundance of choices that can overwhelm as easily as inspire. Collard greens, southern staple, but usually cooked with pork, heavy seasonings. What if we prepared them with Korean techniques? Fermentation? Or just different aromatics? Less bacon fat, more complexity from unfamiliar spices. They spend the next hour collecting ingredients like cultural ambassadors, Min-jae explaining the subtleties of different soy sauces, while Janelle shares stories about vegetables that carry multiple meanings depending on how they're prepared, who's cooking them, what memories they're meant to evoke. The conversation flows with the easy intimacy of people who've learned to trust each other with difficult truths. But underneath the comfortable discussion about food and technique runs a current of awareness. The way their hands briefly touch when reaching for the same item. The comfortable silence that feels more like partnership than friendship. The growing sense that they're shopping not just for ingredients, but for the raw materials of something deeper. Coffee? Min-jae asks as they finish purchasing their experimental ingredients. They find a small cafe near the market, the kind of neighborhood place that serves excellent coffee without pretension. Sitting across from each other at a tiny table, surrounded by the gentle chaos of Saturday morning Seoul, they could be any couple planning a meal together. "Can I ask you something?" Janelle says, stirring sugar into her Americano. "Of course." "The panic attack you described in class, was that really the end of your hotel career?" Min-jae is quiet for a long moment, watching steam rise from his cup. "That was the beginning of the end. The actual end came 2 weeks later, when I realized I didn't remember the last time I'd cooked something just because I wanted to eat it." "What do you mean?" "Every dish was about performance, about proving something to someone. Head chef, food critics, myself. I'd lost the simple pleasure of creating food that nourishes rather than impresses." He looks up from his coffee. "Opening the bistro was supposed to reconnect me with why I started cooking in the first place." "And did it?" "Until 3 weeks ago, no. The bistro became just another stage, smaller venue, but same performance anxiety. Then you walked in with your grandmother's recipe, and I remembered what it feels like to cook for someone rather than at someone." The confession settles between them like a shared secret. Around them, the cafe hums with weekend conversations in multiple languages, the soundtrack of contemporary Seoul where tradition and globalization create daily negotiations of identity. "My turn," Min-jae says. "Why Seoul? Why this program specifically?" Janelle considers how much truth to share, how vulnerable to make herself in the middle of a crowded cafe. "After my second divorce, I needed to be somewhere nobody knew my failures. Academia is a small world. Everyone knows everyone's business, especially when that business involves public relationship disasters. Seoul was escape. Seoul was possibility. A chance to create something meaningful without the weight of everyone's expectations, without having to explain or justify my choices." She pauses. "Also, Korean culture has this beautiful concept of nunchi, social awareness, emotional intelligence, the ability to read situations and respond appropriately. I wanted to learn from that. And have you learned? I'm learning that emotional intelligence isn't the same as emotional armor, that protecting yourself from vulnerability also protects you from connection." The observation hangs in the air between them, heavy with implication. They're both learning, both changing, both discovering that the extension course has become as much about their own growth as their students' exploration of food and memory. "The fusion assignment," Min-jae says eventually. "When should we test our recipes?" Tonight? My apartment has a better kitchen for experimentation, more space to make mistakes without an audience. The invitation is practical, logical, completely reasonable. It's also the first time either of them has suggested spending time together outside the structured boundaries of their professional partnership. Should I bring wine? Only if you want to see how badly I can mess up Korean ingredients when I'm relaxed. They walk back through Tongan Market together, their bags heavy with experimental groceries, their conversation light but loaded with unspoken possibilities. Seoul's autumn afternoon wraps around them like permission to take risks, to try combinations that might fail spectacularly or succeed beautifully. Neither of them acknowledges that tonight feels different, that cooking together in Janelle's private space crosses a line they've been approaching carefully for weeks. They're not quite ready to name what's growing between them, but they're both brave enough to explore it one ingredient at a time. The market bustles around them as they separate at the subway entrance, each carrying their share of groceries, and the quiet excitement of people who've just made a plan that might change everything. Janelle's apartment in Hongdae reflects her temporary but extended status in Seoul. Furnished but not personalized, functional but not quite home. She's arranged ingredients across her small kitchen counter when Min Jae arrives, carrying wine and a wrapped package that piques her curiosity. "What's that?" she asks, accepting the bottle of Korean wine he's selected. "Something I thought might interest you." He unwraps the package, revealing 2 ceramic bowls, one pristine and white, the other obviously repaired with golden veins running through hairline cracks. Kintsugi technique, adapted from Japanese pottery repair. Janelle examines the repaired bowl more closely, running her fingers along the golden lines that transform breakage into beauty rather than concealment. It's stunning. The cracks are part of the design. The philosophy is that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to disguise or discard. The gold makes the piece more valuable than it was originally. Min Jae sets both bowls on her counter. "I thought about our conversation last week, about mistakes and learning to forgive ourselves. The gift is thoughtful in ways that extend beyond its aesthetic appeal. It acknowledges their shared journey through professional and personal failure, suggests that damage can become beauty when handled with care and intention. We'll use these tonight," Janelle decides, "for our fusion experiment. Seems appropriate. Taking familiar ingredients, breaking them down, rebuilding them into something new." They work side by side in her compact kitchen, their movements initially careful as they navigate the intimacy of domestic space. But cooking together creates its own rhythm, and soon they're collaborating with the easy efficiency they've developed over weeks of professional partnership. Janelle begins with her collard greens, but instead of traditional Southern preparation, she's adapted Min Jae's suggestions about Korean flavoring techniques. The perilla seeds get toasted and ground into aromatic powder, mixed with sesame oil and a touch of gochujang for complexity that builds slowly on the palate. "The bitterness balances the richness," she explains, tasting as she adjusts seasoning. "It's like what you said about perilla, confrontational at first, but it grows on you." Min Jae works on his contribution, Korean-style short ribs braised with American techniques, inspired by his classical French training but rooted in flavors from his childhood. Soy sauce and brown butter, kimchi and red wine, East and West in conversation rather than conflict. "My grandmother would be confused by this dish," he admits, reducing the braising liquid into glossy sauce. "But I think she'd understand the intention, taking the best from different traditions, creating something that honors both." They cook and talk, sharing stories that feel safer in the domestic intimacy of Janelle's kitchen than they would in the bistro's public space. She tells him about the loneliness of academic conferences, where she was often the only Black woman in predominantly white spaces, how food became her way of connecting with colleagues who didn't always know how to relate to her professional success. He shares details about his panic attack that he didn't reveal to the extension class, the weeks of insomnia that preceded it, the way perfectionism had become indistinguishable from self-destruction, the moment he realized that his pursuit of culinary excellence had cost him every meaningful relationship in his life. "I haven't cooked for someone I cared about in years," Min-jae admits as they plate their fusion experiments in the kintsugi bowls. Everything was either professional obligation or personal sustenance. Never both. What changed? You, this project. Remembering that food can be conversation, not just consumption. The admission hangs between them as they sit down to taste their creations. Janelle's collard greens are revelatory. Familiar comfort transformed by unexpected complexity. Southern soul food given Korean sophistication without losing its essential character. Min-jae's short ribs represent similar cultural translation. French technique supporting Korean flavors in harmony rather than dominance. "These are beautiful," Janelle says, savoring the way flavors develop across her palate. Complex but not complicated. They taste like integration rather than appropriation. "Like us," Min-jae says quietly. The observation shifts something in the room's atmosphere. They're no longer just colleagues exploring culinary fusion. They're two people acknowledging that their professional partnership has become personal, that their careful collaboration has developed into something that feels dangerously close to intimacy. "Min-jae," Janelle starts, but he interrupts gently. "I know. This complicates things. The extension course, our professional relationship, the careful distance we've been maintaining. It does. Are you sorry?" She considers the question while examining the golden veins in the repaired ceramic bowl, thinking about damage transformed into beauty, about the courage required to rebuild something better from broken pieces. "No," she says finally. "I'm not sorry. Nervous, maybe. Uncertain about timing and wisdom, and whether we're ready for whatever this is becoming. But not sorry." Min-jae reaches across the small table, his fingers finding hers. "What if we approach this like cooking? Start with good ingredients. Be patient with the process. Adjust seasoning as we go. And if it doesn't work, then we learn from the failure. But Janelle," his voice carries the same intensity she heard when he apologized publicly in the bistro. "I've spent 3 years since my breakdown avoiding anything that felt risky. Professional risks, emotional risks, the possibility of caring about someone enough to be hurt by loss. And now? Now I think the biggest risk might be letting fear prevent me from trying." They sit in the soft light of her apartment, holding hands across a table set with experimental fusion cuisine and ceramic bowls that celebrate repair rather than perfection. Outside, Hongdae's nightlife creates its usual symphony of youth and possibility, but inside Janelle's kitchen, two people in their 40s are discovering that some forms of nourishment can't be planned or controlled, only received with gratitude when they appear. The evening ends with gentle goodbyes and careful kisses, the kind of physical affection that acknowledges emotional territory newly claimed but not yet fully explored. They're both careful, both aware that they're handling something fragile and valuable. "Next week," Min-jae says as he prepares to leave, "the students present their fusion dishes. And us? What do we present? Honesty. Whatever this is, we don't hide it from them. They've trusted us with their vulnerability. We owe them the same respect." After he leaves, Janelle sits alone in her kitchen, washing the kintsugi bowls with extra care. She thinks about damage and repair, about the courage required to show people your cracks instead of pretending perfection, about the possibility that love at 40 might be different from love at 25 or 35, less desperate, more intentional, built on foundation of self-knowledge rather than fantasy. The golden veins in the ceramic catch the light as she dries each bowl. Beautiful evidence that some things become more valuable precisely because they've been broken and mended with care. Maybe, she thinks, second chances at love work the same way. The expansion offer arrives on a Tuesday morning when Seoul's autumn light slants through the bistro windows like promise, turning ordinary breakfast service into something cinematic. Min-jae reads the email twice before calling Janelle, his voice carrying excitement and uncertainty in equal measure. Gangnam investor wants to meet. Restaurant group interested in scaling the concept. Multiple locations, expanded menu, potential franchise opportunities. That's incredible, Janelle says, though something in her tone suggests complicated feelings about success, arriving precisely when life has become perfect at its current scale. When do they want to meet? This afternoon. 2:00 at their offices. The meeting takes place in a glass tower that represents everything Min-jae thought he wanted when he first entered Seoul's culinary scene. Prestige, power, the kind of financial backing that transforms small dreams into empire-building enterprises. Lee Sang-ho, the lead investor, is polished in ways that suggest expensive education and inherited comfort. His English is flawless, his suit costs more than most people's monthly salary, and his enthusiasm for Min-jae's bistro concept feels both genuine and calculating. The fusion approach you've developed, Lee explains, gesturing toward a presentation screen that displays market research and projected profit margins, represents exactly what Seoul's dining scene needs. International sophistication with Korean authenticity, accessible to both local and expat communities. What kind of expansion are you envisioning? Min-jae asks. Phase 1, 3 additional locations in Gangnam, Itaewon, and Myeongdong. Standardized menu, consistent branding, professional management systems. Lee clicks through slides showing architectural renderings of sleek dining spaces that look nothing like Min-jae's intimate Seocheon bistro. The extension course component, Janelle interjects. How would that work across multiple locations? Lee's pause is brief but telling. We'd need to streamline that aspect. Perhaps monthly workshops instead of ongoing classes. More focus on the culinary experience, less emphasis on the personal storytelling component. Less emphasis on the personal storytelling, Janelle repeats slowly. Market research indicates that diners want authentic cultural exchange, but they prefer it curated rather than raw. Professional presentation rather than amateur emotional processing. The language is diplomatic, but the message is clear. Lee's investment group sees value in the concept's surface elements while viewing its emotional core as commercially problematic. They want the performance of vulnerability without its messy reality. What about Professor Peterson's role? Min-jae asks. Consulting position, of course. Menu development, staff training, occasional guest appearances. But daily operations would require more streamlined management structure. Janelle feels herself becoming invisible in real time, her contribution reduced from partnership to occasional consultation. The expansion that should feel like success instead feels like erasure. Their collaborative creation sanitized for broader consumption, personal connection replaced by profitable efficiency. The financial terms, Lee continues, are quite generous. Initial investment of 2 billion won, with expansion funding based on performance metrics. Mr. Park would retain creative control over menu development, though final approval would rest with our management team. The meeting continues for another hour, filled with discussions of profit-sharing arrangements, timeline expectations, market positioning strategies that transform a neighborhood bistro into a scalable business model. By the time they leave the glass tower, both Min-jae and Janelle feel simultaneously excited and unsettled. It's an incredible opportunity, Min-jae says as they walk through Gangnam's wide streets, surrounded by the kind of corporate architecture that represents Seoul's economic ambition. It is. But Janelle stops walking, turning to face him on the busy sidewalk. Around them, Seoul's professional class moves with purposeful efficiency, everyone pursuing their own version of success and prosperity. But it's not what we built together. It's a sanitized version of what we built, designed for people who want the aesthetic of authenticity without its emotional requirements. Maybe that's realistic. Maybe what we've created works for 30 people twice a week. but scaling requires compromise. What kind of compromise? Min-jae considers the question while watching traffic flow through the intersection. Thousands of individual decisions creating collective movement. Personal choice constrained by systemic requirements. Less vulnerability, more consistency. Professional boundaries that protect both staff and customers from the kind of emotional exposure we've been encouraging. So we turn our students' courage into entertainment. We commodify their healing process. We share what we've learned with more people. Isn't that valuable too? The argument represents larger questions about authenticity and accessibility. Individual connection versus systemic impact. They both understand the appeal of Lee's offer: financial security, professional recognition, the opportunity to influence Seoul's dining culture on a meaningful scale. They also both understand what would be lost in translation: the intimate space where damaged people learn to trust each other with difficult truths, where food becomes medicine rather than just consumption, where healing happens in community rather than isolation. I need time to think, Min-jae says finally. How much time do they want an answer? 1 week. As they ride the subway back to Seocheon, both are quiet, processing the weight of decisions that will determine not just their professional futures, but the nature of their partnership. Success has arrived wearing the wrong face, offering everything they thought they wanted, while requiring them to sacrifice everything that makes their current work meaningful. The bistro feels different when they return. Smaller, but more precious. Intimate, rather than limiting. The evening's extension course session includes presentations of fusion dishes, and the room fills with laughter, tears, and the kind of authentic sharing that can't be replicated or scaled or converted into profitable programming. After the students leave, Min-jae and Janelle clean the kitchen in contemplative silence, both aware that they're handling something fragile that external success might irreparably damage. What do you think we should do? Min-jae asks as they finish the last of the dishes. I think, Janelle says carefully, we should ask ourselves what our grandmother Dorothy and your classical French training and my 2 failed marriages and your panic attack have taught us about the difference between success and satisfaction. And what's that? That some things become more valuable when they remain small enough to handle with care. But even as she says it, Janelle knows the decision isn't simple. Financial security, professional recognition, and the opportunity to help more people are valuable considerations. The question is whether growth requires losing the essential qualities that make growth worthwhile. They lock up the bistro together, stepping into Seoul's cooling night air with unresolved tension, and 7 days to decide between dreams they thought they wanted and reality they've learned to love. The job offer from Northwestern University arrives via email on Thursday morning, forwarded through academic networks that still remember Janelle Peterson as a promising scholar whose personal life temporarily derailed her professional trajectory. The position is everything she thought she wanted when she first applied for international opportunities. Tenure track, immediate start, full benefits, and the kind of intellectual prestige that comes with teaching at a top-tier American institution. Janelle stares at the email for 20 minutes, her cursor hovering over the reply button while Seoul's morning traffic creates its usual symphony outside her apartment window. 6 months ago, this opportunity would have felt like salvation. Now it feels like escape, and she's no longer certain whether escape is cowardice or wisdom. Her phone buzzes with a text from Min-jae. Investor wants answer by Monday. Can we talk tonight? The timing feels like the universe presenting a test she's not prepared to take. Northwestern offers security, predictability, return to a world where her professional competence isn't complicated by personal vulnerability. The Gangnam expansion offers financial reward, but requires compromising everything that's made the past 2 months meaningful. And staying in Seoul without either opportunity means accepting uncertainty, choosing love over security, betting on partnership that has no guarantees beyond their daily choice to keep choosing each other. She responds to Min-jae. My place, 7 p.m. We need to talk. The day passes in slow motion, teaching her regular university courses while mentally composing resignation letters, decline letters, acceptance speeches for possibilities she's not sure she wants. By evening, she's rehearsed conversations that range from confident decision-making to complete emotional breakdown. Min-jae arrives carrying groceries instead of wine, his expression suggesting he's made decisions of his own. "I'm turning down the expansion," he says, without preamble, setting bags on her kitchen counter. The numbers were impressive, but the cost was everything we've built together. Min-jae, let me finish. He begins unpacking ingredients. Simple things. Comfort foods that suggest cooking for solace rather than performance. I've spent most of my adult life chasing other people's definitions of success. The Gangnam offer represents more of the same. Bigger stage, higher stakes, same fundamental emptiness. Janelle watches him move through her kitchen with automatic efficiency, preparing to create sustenance while navigating emotional complexity. What about financial security, professional recognition, the opportunity to impact more people? What about the 30 students who trust us enough to share their family secrets? What about the healing that happens in small spaces where people feel safe to be imperfect? Min-jae pauses in his preparation, looking directly at her. What about us? What we've built together? What we're still building? The questions hang in the air while Janelle wrestles with her own news, her own impossible choice between security and possibility. "I got a job offer," she says finally. "Northwestern University, tenure track, immediate start." Min-jae goes very still, his hands freezing mid-motion as he processes this information. Chicago. When would you leave?" They want an answer by next week. Start date in January. The kitchen falls quiet except for the distant sounds of Hongdae's evening coming to life. Students gathering in cafes, restaurants preparing for dinner service, the city's daily renewal of energy and possibility. "Is that what you want?" Min-jae asks quietly. 6 months ago, absolutely. 2 months ago, probably. Now? Janelle sits down at her small table, suddenly exhausted by the weight of choosing between different versions of her future. "Now I don't know what I want beyond not wanting to make the wrong decision again." What would be the wrong decision? Staying for the wrong reasons. Leaving for the wrong reasons. Choosing security over growth, or growth over stability, or love over career, or career over love. Her voice cracks slightly. "I've been making the wrong choices about men and work and life priorities for 20 years. How do I know this isn't just another mistake with better Korean food?" Min-jae sets down the knife he's been holding and moves to sit across from her. Maybe you don't know. Maybe nobody knows when they're in the middle of making the choice. Maybe the best we can do is be honest about what we're afraid of and what we're hoping for, and then choose based on which fear we can live with better. What are you afraid of? That I'm falling in love with someone who's going to leave because I'm not enough to compete with tenure-track security and American academic prestige. His admission comes quietly, without drama, like stating a fact he's been carrying for weeks. That I've finally found someone who makes me want to be better than I am, and she's going to discover that better isn't good enough. Janelle stares at him across the small table, processing the vulnerability he's just offered. And what are you hoping for? That maybe love at 43 is different from love at 25. That it's built on actually knowing each other instead of projecting fantasies. That it can survive practical considerations and competing priorities and the messy reality of two people who've both failed at this before. He reaches across the table, his fingers finding hers. That maybe we're both ready for something real instead of something convenient. Min-jae? She starts to speak, then stops, overwhelmed by the weight of honesty he's asking for. I'm afraid that staying is just another way of avoiding real life. That Seoul and the extension course and what's growing between us is beautiful but temporary, like study abroad or summer camp. That eventually reality will intrude. and I'll discover I've been hiding from my actual life instead of building a new one. And what are you hoping for? That maybe home isn't a place you return to, but something you create with people who choose to build it with you. The words come easier than she expected. That maybe I can have both. Meaningful work and meaningful connection. Professional growth and personal happiness. Career success and emotional intimacy. That maybe I don't have to choose between the life I planned and the life that's actually available. They sit in the soft light of her apartment, their hands connected across the table, surrounded by ingredients for a meal they haven't cooked yet, and decisions they haven't made yet. The Northwestern offer, Min-jae says eventually. How long do you have to decide? 1 week. And the extension course ends next week too. Yes. So we're both facing endings. And Janelle considers this. The synchronicity of choices arriving at the same moment. Or beginnings. What if... Min-jae hesitates, then continues with the careful precision he applies to unfamiliar recipes. What if we approach this like the fusion experiments we've been teaching? Take the best elements from both possibilities, see if we can create something new that honors both traditions. What would that look like? I don't know yet, but maybe we don't have to solve it tonight. Maybe we can cook dinner, hold each other, and trust that tomorrow will be a little clearer about what we're actually choosing between. Janelle lifts his hand to her lips, pressing a soft kiss to his knuckles. That sounds like the most mature approach to life-altering decisions I've heard in years. We're 40-something adults. Maybe it's time we started acting like it. They stand together, moving back to the kitchen counter where ingredients wait to be transformed into nourishment. As they cook side by side, their movements synchronized by weeks of collaboration, the apartment fills with the warm smells of connection and possibility. Outside, Seoul's neon lights paint promises against the cooling night. But inside Janelle's kitchen, two people are discovering that some decisions can't be rushed, some futures can't be planned, and some forms of love require the courage to remain uncertain while you learn what you're actually building together. The Northwestern offer can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, there's dinner to prepare, wine to share, and the quiet revelation that home might be less about geography and more about finding someone willing to create beauty from whatever ingredients life provides. The Kintsugi workshop takes place in Min-jae's bistro after hours on a rainy Sunday afternoon, when Seoul's gray light filters through the windows like meditation. 8 students from their extension course have gathered around tables covered with broken ceramic pieces, small brushes, and containers of golden repair paste that gleams like liquid hope. The philosophy, Janelle explains to the group, holding up a bowl she deliberately broke and repaired the night before, is that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to disguise. The gold doesn't hide the cracks, it celebrates them. Min-jae moves between the tables with quiet guidance, helping students prepare their ceramic pieces for repair. Some have brought dishes broken in their own kitchens. Others have carefully damaged pieces provided for the workshop. The common thread is intention. Each person working with something that represents personal fracture, relationships that ended, dreams that shattered, trust that broke under pressure. It's like my marriage, says Sarah, a graduate student who's been attending the course with her Korean boyfriend. She traces the hairline crack running through her ceramic bowl. We broke, but maybe the repair can make us stronger than we were originally. Or maybe, adds Marcus, an American expat teacher, some things are supposed to break so you can see what's actually worth saving. The conversations flow as hands work with golden paste, everyone finding their own metaphor in the ancient art of beautiful repair. But Janelle notices Min-jae growing quieter as the afternoon progresses, his usual instructional energy replaced by something more contemplative. After the students leave, carrying their repaired ceramics like trophies of resilience, Min-jae and Janelle clean the workshop materials in comfortable silence. The bistro feels different in the Sunday afternoon quiet. More intimate, less performative, like a sanctuary rather than a business. "What were you thinking about during the workshop?" Janelle asks, as they wash brushes sticky with golden paste. "My parents' marriage," Min-jae says quietly. "They divorced when I was 15. Very bitter, very public. Lots of accusations and lawyer meetings and arguments about who destroyed what. That must have been difficult." It was. But watching today's workshop, I kept thinking, what if they'd approached it differently? What if instead of trying to hide the damage or pretend it never happened, they'd found a way to acknowledge the breaks and rebuild from there? Janelle sets down the brush she's cleaning, recognizing the deeper conversation he's approaching. "Are we still talking about your parents?" "We're talking about us." Min-jae turns to face her, his expression serious, but not heavy. "About the fact that we're both carrying damage from previous relationships, previous failures, previous versions of ourselves that didn't work out as planned. And maybe that damage doesn't disqualify us from building something beautiful together. Maybe it gives us materials to work with that we wouldn't have had otherwise." The bistro falls quiet, except for the soft sound of rain against windows and the distant hum of Seoul's Sunday afternoon rhythm. Outside, the city continues its endless cycle of ambition and survival. But inside the warm kitchen, two people are discovering that some conversations require the safety of closed doors and shared work. "The Northwestern offer," Janelle says suddenly. "I've been thinking about it wrong." "How so?" "I've been treating it like a choice between two different lives. Seoul life versus Chicago life. Relationship life versus career life. Taking risks versus playing it safe." She leans against the counter, her voice gaining certainty as she speaks. "But it's not that binary. It's about what kind of person I want to become, and what kind of partnership I want to build. What kind do you want? The kind that makes both people stronger, not smaller. The kind that encourages growth instead of requiring sacrifice. The kind that honors ambition and vulnerability in equal measure." Janelle meets his eyes. "I want to build something with someone who challenges me to be better while accepting me as I am. Or even if that means long distance for a while. Even if it means navigating academic schedules and restaurant hours and the logistics of two people with demanding careers." The questions address practical concerns they've been avoiding. The reality that love at 40-something comes with established careers, financial obligations, professional commitments that can't be easily rearranged for romantic convenience. "Even then," Janelle says, "maybe especially then, maybe the relationships that require real work, real communication, real intentionality are the ones worth having." Min-jae moves to stand beside her, close enough that she can see the silver threads in his dark hair, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a kitchen accident years ago, the careful way he considers her words before responding. "I called Northwestern this morning," he says quietly. Janelle's heart stops. "You what?" "I know people there. Culinary connections, restaurant consultants who work with their hospitality program. I wanted to understand what you'd be walking into, whether there might be opportunities for collaboration." Min-jae. Turns out they have a new interdisciplinary program launching next fall. Food studies, cultural anthropology, creative writing, exactly the kind of boundary-crossing work you've been developing here. His voice carries excited discovery. And they're looking for industry partners, people who can provide practical culinary experience to complement academic theory. The implication hangs in the air between them like possibility made tangible. Not choosing between Seoul and Chicago, but creating something that bridges both. Not sacrificing relationship for career, but building partnership that supports both people's professional growth. You'd consider moving to Chicago? I'd consider moving anywhere with you. But more than that, I'd consider building something new that honors both our dreams instead of requiring one of us to abandon theirs. Janelle stares at him, processing the magnitude of what he's suggesting. That's terrifying. Why? Because it's exactly what I want. Because it requires trusting that we're building something strong enough to survive major life changes, geographical transitions, the stress of starting over in a new place. She pauses. Because it means admitting that what we have is real enough to be worth rearranging my entire life around. Is it? The question deserves an honest answer, and Janelle realizes she's known the truth for weeks without having the courage to voice it. Yes, she says simply. What we have is real. What we're building is worth protecting and nurturing and fighting for. Min-jae's smile starts small and grows until it transforms his entire face. Then let's start making plans. Real plans, not contingency plans. Plans based on what we want to create together instead of what we're afraid of losing. They spend the rest of the afternoon at his kitchen table, laptops open, researching opportunities and timelines and the practical logistics of building a life that spans 2 continents. The conversation flows between logistics and dreams, practical concerns and hopeful possibilities, the kind of planning that couples do when they're ready to bet on their future together. As evening settles over Seoul, they cook dinner together in the bistro's kitchen, not for students or customers, but for themselves. The meal is simple, but perfect. Ingredients they both love, techniques they've taught each other, flavors that represent the fusion of their separate experiences into something entirely new. To golden glue, Min-jae says, raising his wine glass in a toast. To beautiful repairs, Janelle responds, clinking her glass against his. Outside, Seoul's neon lights begin their nightly performance, painting the city in promises and possibilities. But inside the quiet bistro, 2 people who started as strangers have discovered that some breaks are meant to happen. Not to destroy what came before, but to create space for something stronger, more beautiful, more intentional than either person could have built alone. The Northwestern decision can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, there's wine to finish, stories to share, and the quiet satisfaction of choosing love that's complicated and real over convenience that's simple and hollow. The golden paste in their workshop materials has dried to permanent brightness, sealing cracks that will never break the same way again. Some repairs, their learning, last forever. The final extension course session transforms Min-jae's bistro into something between art installation and community celebration. Students have prepared dishes that represent their semester-long journey through food and memory, each table telling stories of cultural fusion, family healing, and the courage to share intimate truths with relative strangers. But tonight isn't just about student presentations. It's about public testimony, the kind of vulnerability that makes private growth into community witness, personal transformation into collective hope. Dr. Sarah Kim sits in the front row with university administrators, her initial skepticism replaced by something approaching awe as she watches students present work that transcends traditional academic boundaries. Beside her, food writers and cultural critics take notes, documenting an educational experiment that's produced results none of them expected. We call this a manifesto dinner, Janelle explains to the gathered crowd, her voice carrying across the packed bistro. Not because we're angry or demanding revolution, but because we're making public declarations about what nourishes us, what we're willing to fight for, what we believe about the connection between food and healing. Min-jae stands beside her, wearing his chef's whites not as uniform, but as ceremonial dress. Tonight, we're serving honesty. It might not always taste comfortable, but it's guaranteed to be real. The first presentation comes from Elena, a Spanish exchange student who's created a dish that bridges her grandmother's paella with Korean ingredients. As she plates saffron-infused rice with kimchi and Spanish chorizo, she tells the story of calling her conservative grandmother to explain why she's fallen in love with Seoul, why she's changing her thesis topic, why she's learning to cook with ingredients that don't exist in her family's traditional recipes. She cried, Elena admits to the room, her own eyes bright with tears. not because she was disappointed, but because she recognized the loneliness in my voice when I talked about missing home. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Mija, home isn't ingredients. Home is cooking with love for people who matter to you." The applause is gentle but sustained, the kind that acknowledges courage as much as culinary skill. Marcus follows with his story of using Korean fermentation techniques to preserve African American soul food flavors. Collard greens transformed through kimchi-making processes, cornbread enhanced with gochujang, sweet potato dishes that bridge Southern comfort with Korean innovation. "I've been running from my roots my entire adult life," he confesses, plating dishes that look like fusion, but taste like coming home. "Ashamed of being from rural Alabama, ashamed of my family's struggles, ashamed of food that seemed too simple for my educated palate. But learning Korean cooking techniques taught me that complexity comes from patience and respect, not from rejecting what came before." Each presentation builds emotional momentum, students revealing transformation that extends far beyond culinary skills into territory of identity, belonging, and the courage to claim multiple cultural influences without apology. But the evening's most powerful moment comes when Janelle herself takes the demonstration station. "My name is Janelle Peterson," she begins, her voice steadier than she feels. 42 years old, twice divorced, African-American academic who came to Seoul to hide from my failures and accidentally learned to cook my way into healing. She begins preparing her grandmother's sweet potato recipe, but not the version she taught Min-jae weeks ago. This version includes modifications she's developed through working with him. Korean techniques that enhance rather than mask the dish's essential character, fusion that honors both traditions. I spent most of my adult life believing that success meant transcending my background, proving I could succeed in spaces that weren't designed for people like me. Her hands work automatically, muscle memory freeing her mind to navigate vulnerable territory. I thought sophistication meant rejecting comfort food. Intellectual growth meant abandoning family recipes. Professional achievement meant distance from anything that marked me as different. The bistro falls completely quiet, everyone recognizing the universal struggle she's describing, the tension between honoring origins and embracing growth, between fitting in and standing out, between success and authenticity. But working with Min-jae, learning from Korean cooking philosophy, sharing meals with students from 15 different countries, it taught me that fusion isn't about abandoning what makes you unique. It's about integrating influences in ways that make everything stronger. She adds cardamom to the sweet potatoes with ceremonial precision, the spice her grandmother bought in shame but used with secret pride. This dish represents 3 generations of women who loved food despite economic constraints, who created beauty from whatever ingredients they could afford, who passed down recipes along with lessons about dignity, creativity, and the kind of love that nourishes bodies and souls. Min-jae approaches the cooking station, not to assist, but to stand beside her as she works. The gesture speaks of partnership that supports without overwhelming, presence that honors without intruding. And it represents partnership with someone who taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that sharing your story makes you more powerful, not less. That love, real love, doesn't require you to become smaller or simpler or safer. It challenges you to become more fully yourself. She looks directly at Min-jae as she plates the finished dish, her eyes bright with tears and determination. Which is why I'm making a public declaration tonight. A manifesto about choosing growth over security, partnership over independence, love that requires courage over convenience that demands nothing. The room holds its collective breath, sensing announcement that will shift everything. I've accepted the position at Northwestern University starting in January, but I'm not going alone. She turns to address the full room, her voice carrying across tables filled with fusion dishes and faces displaying hope, curiosity, concern. Min-jae is coming with me to Chicago, where we'll be developing a new interdisciplinary program that bridges culinary arts with cultural studies, academic research with community engagement, the kind of education that feeds minds and bodies simultaneously. The applause erupts like celebration, but Janelle raises her hand for continued attention. More importantly, we're getting married. Really married, not contract married or convenience married, but choose each other every day married. Because we've learned that the best fusion happens when two complete individuals decide to create something together that's stronger than either could build alone. Min-jae steps forward, pulling a small box from his apron pocket. "Janelle Peterson," he says, his voice carrying across the quiet bistro. "Will you marry me for real this time? Will you build a life with me that honors both our dreams, both our histories, both our commitments to creating nourishment that matters?" The proposal is public but intimate, witnessed by students who've shared their own vulnerable stories, surrounded by the smells of fusion dishes that represent courage and creativity, and the willingness to risk failure in pursuit of something beautiful. "Yes," Janelle says, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes to Chicago. Yes to marriage. Yes to building something together that neither of us could imagine alone." The ring is simple, a band of white gold with small diamonds that catch the bistro's warm lighting. But the symbolism is complex. Commitment that's been tested through vulnerability, partnership that's been forged through shared work, love that's been chosen rather than stumbled into. As Min-jae slides the ring onto her finger, the entire bistro erupts in applause, cheers, and the kind of celebration that happens when people witness authentic transformation rather than performance. Dr. Sarah Kim approaches them as the evening winds down, her usually reserved demeanor softened by what she's witnessed. "This program," she says, gesturing toward tables still laden with fusion dishes and stories of cultural bridge building, "it's exactly what education should be. Personal growth that serves community need, individual healing that creates collective understanding." "Will the university support replicating it?" Janelle asks. "The university will do whatever it takes to keep this model alive. And when you're ready to expand it internationally, Seoul National will be your first partner institution." As students help clean the bistro and pack leftover food for anyone who wants to continue the evening's conversations, Janelle and Min-jae find themselves alone in the kitchen, where their partnership first began to shift from professional to personal. "No second thoughts?" Min-jae asks, washing dishes with automatic efficiency. "Only about timing. Whether January is too soon, whether we should wait until summer, whether long-distance engagement is romantic or just logistically complicated." "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That we're both 40-something adults who've waited long enough for the right person to build a life with. That if we're going to take risks, we should take them together. That if we're going to succeed or fail, we should do it as partners." Min-jae sets down the plate he's drying and turns to face her directly. "I love you, Janelle Peterson. I love your intelligence, and your vulnerability, and your terrible jokes, and your fierce loyalty to students, and your grandmother's sweet potato recipe, and the way you make me want to be braver than I've ever been. I love you too, Min-jae Park. I love your precision, and your generosity, and your willingness to apologize publicly when you make mistakes, and the way you see potential in ingredients everyone else would discard, and how you've taught me that healing happens in community, not isolation." They kiss in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the debris of their students' culinary experiments and the promise of their own uncertain but hopeful future. Outside, Seoul glitters with its endless ambitions. But inside the bistro that brought them together, two people have found something rarer than success or security. They found partnership that makes both people more themselves, love that requires growth rather than stagnation, commitment that's been chosen rather than convenient. The manifesto dinner is over, but the real manifesto, the daily choice to build something beautiful together, is just beginning. 6 months later, The Chicago program is thriving in ways that exceed everyone's expectations. The university's new Center for Culinary Cultural Studies occupies a renovated warehouse space in Pilsen, equipped with professional kitchens, lecture halls, and community dining areas that host weekly dinners, bridging academic research with neighborhood engagement. But it's Sunday afternoons that have become Janelle and Minjae's favorite time, when they close the center to students and open it to themselves, cooking simple meals that represent their ongoing fusion, not just of cuisines, but of lives. Today's menu reflects their current reality. Korean-style fried chicken, with sides inspired by Janelle's southern roots. Banchan dishes that incorporate ingredients from Chicago's diverse markets. And desserts that represent their collaborative sweet tooth, rather than any traditional cuisine. The food is delicious but not precious, complex but not competitive, nourishing without being performative. The review comes out tomorrow, Minjae says, plating their experimental dessert, a sweet potato souffle with cardamom ice cream and gochujang caramel sauce. Chicago Tribune food critics spent 3 hours interviewing students last week. Nervous? Janelle asks, though she's learned to read his expressions well enough to know he's more excited than anxious. Curious. It's the first time our work has been evaluated by someone focused purely on food, rather than educational impact or cultural bridge building. He pauses in his plating, considering. What if they don't understand what we're actually doing here? Then they'll learn. Or they won't, and we'll keep doing it anyway because it matters to the people who matter to us. The answer represents growth for both of them. Janelle's movement away from external validation as primary motivation. Minjae's acceptance that meaningful work doesn't require universal approval. 6 months of marriage, professional partnership, and the daily reality of building a life together has taught them both the difference between performance and authenticity. Their apartment is a 10-minute walk from the center, a renovated loft space that feels like home in ways neither of their previous places ever did. Furniture that represents both their tastes, kitchen equipment that serves function over aesthetics, bookshelves that hold academic texts beside Korean cookbooks beside Janelle's grandmother's handwritten recipe cards. The Seoul workshop proposal came in, Janelle mentions, opening wine that represents another fusion experiment. Korean rice wine aged using French techniques, created by a vintner who studied at both institutions they've called home. Which one? Summer intensive. 3 weeks, 40 international students, full cultural immersion program with our Seoul national partners. They want to use Minjae's Bistro as home base. The opportunity represents everything they've worked toward. International recognition, institutional support, the chance to scale their educational model across continents and cultures. It also represents choices about balance, commitment, the ongoing challenge of building careers that support, rather than compete with each other. What do you think? Minjae asks. I think we should do it. I think 3 weeks in Seoul every summer. Maintaining connections with the place where we figured out how to be real with each other. Sounds like exactly the kind of life I want to build. Even with jet lag, language barriers, the logistical nightmare of coordinating programs across 12 time zones. Especially with all that. Easy doesn't teach you anything. Complicated makes you stronger, more creative, more intentional about what you're creating together. They eat their experimental meal in comfortable silence, each dish representing successful risk-taking, willingness to fail in pursuit of something better than safe choices would produce. The sweet potato souffle is revelation. Familiar comfort elevated through techniques that honor multiple traditions without overwhelming any of them. We're getting good at this, Minjae observes. At cooking? At partnership. At making decisions together that serve both our dreams instead of requiring one of us to compromise our vision. At building something that's ours without losing what makes each of us individually valuable. Janelle considers this assessment while savoring the complex flavors of their dessert creation. What's next? Next? For us, for the program, for whatever we're building together, Ma, Min-jae stands and moves to the window that overlooks Chicago's skyline, the city lights beginning their evening performance against the autumn darkness. More students, more partnerships, more opportunities to prove that education works best when it engages hearts and hands along with minds. And personally, he returns to the table, reaching for her hand. A house with a proper garden where we can grow ingredients for both Korean and Southern cooking. Maybe adopting children who need families that understand what it means to bridge cultures. Definitely growing old together while arguing about recipe modifications and teaching methods, and whether gochujang improves everything or just most things. The vision he describes sounds less like fantasy than like inevitability. Natural progression of partnership that's been tested through vulnerability, stress, geographical transitions, and the daily reality of two strong-willed people choosing cooperation over competition. That sounds perfect, Janelle says. Challenging and messy and complicated and perfect. What about you? What's next on your list? A book. About food and healing, cultural fusion and personal transformation. The difference between integration and appropriation. Something that honors everyone who's taught us about courage and creativity and the possibility of building new traditions that respect old ones. Dedicated to Grandmother Dorothy, who taught me that beautiful things are worth the cost. Min-jae Park, who taught me that vulnerability is strength. All the students who trusted us with their stories. All the people still learning to cook their way into healing. The dedication sounds less like gratitude than like promise. Commitment to continue the work they've started, to honor the community they've built, to remain worthy of the trust people place in them when they share family recipes and personal failures, and dreams that feel too fragile to voice. They clean the kitchen together with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized by months of collaboration. Outside, Chicago settles into its Sunday evening rhythm, but inside their temporary home, two people are discovering that some experiments succeed beyond their creators' wildest hopes. The center's Monday morning schedule includes 3 classes, 2 community workshops, and a planning meeting for the summer Soul Intensive. But tonight, there's wine to finish, stories to share, and the quiet satisfaction of choosing love that requires daily work over convenience that demands nothing. Short menu Sundays, Min-jae says, raising his glass in their weekly toast. Simple ingredients, complex flavors, Janelle responds, clicking her glass against his. The sound echoes through their kitchen like promise, like prayer, like the beginning of another week of building something beautiful together, one carefully chosen ingredient at a time. 1 year later, Janelle stands in the Seoul National University lecture hall, where she first presented the Table Memory and Word proposal. But today, the room overflows with international educators, food writers, and students whose lives have been transformed by programs modeled on their original experiment. The annual symposium has drawn participants from 30 countries, each sharing innovations in experiential learning that bridges cultural understanding with personal healing. But the most significant presence in the room isn't a distinguished academic or celebrated chef. It's Dorothy Johnson Peterson, age 78, Janelle's great-aunt who raised her after her grandmother's death, sitting in the front row with a smile that suggests pride mixed with amused bewilderment at finding herself at an international academic conference. "When my great-niece called to invite me to South Korea," Dorothy says during the opening panel, her voice carrying easily across the packed auditorium, "I thought she'd lost her mind. Aunt Dot," she said, "I want you to see what Grandma's sweet potato recipe has accomplished." I figured she meant a nice dinner party. I didn't expect all this. The laughter that ripples through the audience is warm, inclusive, the kind that recognizes truth-telling over academic pretension. Dorothy's presence represents something essential about their program's philosophy, the understanding that wisdom often lives in unexpected places, that honoring family knowledge doesn't require professionalizing it. Min-jae joins Janelle on stage for their joint presentation. Their comfort with public partnership reflecting the year they've spent learning to navigate 2 careers, 2 cultures, and the daily negotiations of marriage between equals who are still discovering each other. Love as practice, Janelle begins, echoing the symposium's theme, isn't just about romantic relationships. It's about the daily choice to see potential in people and situations that others might dismiss. It's about creating communities where vulnerability becomes strength, where sharing stories becomes healing, where cooking together becomes connection. In Korean culture, Min-jae adds, there's a concept called jong, emotional bonds that develop through shared experiences, mutual care, the gradual building of trust through small, consistent actions. Our program works because it creates conditions for jong to develop between people who might never have found common ground otherwise. They click through slides showing student work from their Chicago Center, the Summer Soul Intensives, satellite programs now operating in São Paulo, Montreal, and Melbourne. Each image represents lives changed through the simple revolutionary act of sharing family recipes with strangers who become community. But the presentation's emotional center comes when they invite Dorothy to join them on stage. Mrs. Johnson, Janelle says formally, then breaks into a grin. Aunt Dot, would you tell everyone about the cardamom? Dorothy approaches the microphone with the confidence of a woman who's raised children, survived economic hardship, and learned not to be intimidated by fancy environments. That cardamom, she says, shaking her head with fond exasperation. My mama bought that spice with grocery money she couldn't afford to spend, then felt guilty every time she used it because it seemed too good for people like us. The auditorium falls silent, recognizing the universal story beneath the specific details, the way shame about economic status gets internalized, how pleasure becomes complicated by class consciousness, how family recipes carry emotional archaeology along with flavor profiles. But she couldn't help herself, Dorothy continues. That cardamom made her sweet potatoes taste like celebration instead of survival. And now look. She gestures toward the room full of international educators. Her secret spice is being discussed in universities on 4 continents. If that's not vindication, I don't know what is. The applause is sustained, emotional, recognizing not just Dorothy's story, but every family recipe that has bridged survival and beauty, necessity and joy, tradition and innovation. During the afternoon break, Janelle walks through Seoul's autumn streets with her aunt, showing her the neighborhood where the original bistro experiment took place, the market where she and Min-jae first shopped together, the coffee shops where students gathered to process their emotional excavations. You happy, baby girl? Dorothy asks, as they pause outside Min-jae's old bistro, now run by Ji-hoon as an official partner location of their educational network. Yes, Janelle says without hesitation. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but happy in ways I didn't know were possible when I first came to Seoul. Good. Happiness that comes easy don't teach you nothing. Happiness you have to work for. That's worth keeping. The observation encapsulates everything Janelle has learned about love at 40-something, about building partnerships that honor individual growth while creating collective strength. Easy love would have meant settling for convenience, security without challenge, comfort without growth. Working for happiness has meant accepting uncertainty, choosing vulnerability, building something together that requires daily attention and care. That evening's dinner showcases the fusion techniques their programs have developed. Not Korean-American food or Korean-influenced American food, but entirely new cuisine that honors multiple traditions while creating something unprecedented. The meal serves as practical demonstration of their educational philosophy. Integration that strengthens rather than dilutes. Innovation that respects history while creating new possibilities. The guests include former students who now teach their own versions of experiential cultural education, food writers documenting the intersection of cuisine and social justice, university administrators seeking to replicate programs that prove learning happens best when it engages hearts and hands along with minds. But the table's warmest moment comes when Dorothy raises her glass in a toast. "To my great niece and her husband," she says, her voice carrying across the restaurant, "who taught an old woman that family recipes are meant to be shared, that love grows stronger when it includes more people, and that some mistakes, like traveling halfway around the world to teach strangers how to cook, turn out to be the best decisions you ever made." The applause mingles with laughter, recognition, and the kind of joy that happens when individual growth serves collective celebration. Later, as they walk along the Han River under Seoul's glittering night sky, Janelle and Min-jae reflect on the day's presentations, the week's workshops, the year's growth in their professional and personal partnership. "Remember our first walk along this river?" Min-jae asks, his arm warm around Janelle's shoulders. "When we were still pretending this was purely professional collaboration? When we were both terrified of admitting we were falling in love with someone who might leave? Now look at us. International conference presenters, published researchers, married adults who figured out how to support each other's dreams while building shared ones." The transformation seems impossible when measured against their original careful distance, their initial commitment to professional boundaries, their mutual terror of repeating previous relationship failures. But growth often happens gradually, through daily choices that accumulate into fundamental change. "What's next?" Min-jae asks, the question that has become their favorite form of future planning. "The book launches next month. The documentary about our program premieres at the Toronto Film Festival. The Seoul Summer Intensive has a waiting list 3 times longer than our capacity. And personally?" Janelle stops walking, turning to face him beside the river where they first admitted their feelings for each other. The Han River reflects Seoul's city lights and patterns that shift with the gentle current, creating beauty that's both permanent and constantly changing. "Personally, I want to keep practicing love with you. Keep learning how to be married to someone who challenges me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. Keep building a partnership that makes both of us stronger instead of requiring either of us to become smaller. Even when it's difficult? Even when we disagree about program direction or book deadlines, or whether gochujang belongs in cornbread. Especially then. Easy relationships don't teach you anything. Relationships that require you to grow, to communicate clearly, to choose each other repeatedly, those are worth the work." Min-jae pulls her closer, their bodies finding the rhythm they've developed over months of learning to move through life together. "I love that we argue about seasoning ratios and student evaluation methods. I love that you challenge my assumptions about Korean culinary traditions. I love that we're building something neither of us could have imagined alone." "What do you love most?" Janelle asks, the kind of question couples ask when they're still discovering each other, still finding new reasons to choose partnership over independence. "I love that we turned a professional disaster into personal transformation. I love that your Aunt Dorothy flew 16 hours to see what we've built together. I love that our students send us wedding invitations and baby pictures and photos of dishes they've created in their own kitchens." He pauses, looking directly into her eyes. "But mostly, I love that you taught me the difference between performing love and practicing love." "What's the difference?" "Performing love is about meeting expectations, hitting romantic milestones, looking like the couples in movies or magazines. Practicing love is about showing up consistently, choosing generosity over defensiveness, creating safety for each other to be imperfect and still worthy of care." The distinction captures everything they've learned about relationship building at 40-something, when past failures have stripped away illusions about romantic destiny, but haven't diminished hope for authentic connection. Practice requires intention, repetition, willingness to improve through mistakes rather than demanding immediate perfection. They continue walking along the river path, passing couples sharing picnics despite the October coolness. Families teaching children to ride bicycles, elderly friends playing traditional Korean games beneath the streetlights. Seoul's nighttime energy surrounds them, but they move through it like people who found their own rhythm within the city's larger symphony. The house, Min-jae says suddenly. What house? The one we've been talking about buying. Garden space for Korean vegetables and southern herbs, kitchen big enough for serious entertaining, home office where you can write without distractions from restaurant noise. You want to start looking seriously? I want to start planning for permanence instead of just adapting to whatever opportunities arise. I want to choose a place where we can build the kind of life that serves our work instead of competing with it. The shift from reactive to intentional living represents maturity they've both earned through years of failed relationships, professional missteps, and the gradual understanding that happiness requires active construction rather than passive hope. Chicago suburbs or staying in the city? Janelle asks, practical questions that reveal how seriously she takes his suggestion. Whatever gives us the best foundation for the work we're doing together. Community access, transportation to universities and food suppliers, space that accommodates both solitude and hospitality. Sounds perfect, challenging and expensive, and completely worth the investment. They've reached the section of Riverbank where they first cooked together, where students still gather for evening programs, where their professional partnership transformed into personal commitment. The location holds memory now, the kind of significance that comes from choosing to return to places where important changes happened. One more question, Janelle says as they prepare to head home. Always. Are you ready for whatever comes next? Success that might change the dynamics of what we've built? Attention that might commercialize our approach? Growth that might require choices we haven't had to make yet? Are you asking if I'm ready to practice love under pressure? If our partnership can survive public scrutiny, financial opportunities, the temptation to prioritize professional advancement over personal connection? That's exactly what I'm asking. Min-jae is quiet for a long moment, watching Seoul's reflected lights dance on the Han River's surface. I think the practice itself prepares us. Every day we choose each other, we get stronger at choosing each other. Every conflict we navigate honestly, we get better at communication. Every success we share without competing, we prove that partnership can enhance rather than threaten individual achievement. So yes, I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as we face it together. The walk home takes them through neighborhoods that have become familiar, past restaurants where they've celebrated program milestones, convenience stores where they buy ingredients for late-night cooking experiments, coffee shops where they've planned lessons and argued about pedagogical approaches, and learned to disagree without damaging their underlying affection. Seoul has become home in ways neither expected when they first met in a bistro kitchen. Two damaged people carrying professional competence and personal wounds in equal measure. Now the city represents transformation, the place where they learned that healing happens in community, that love requires practice, that some risks are worth taking regardless of guarantees about outcome. Their apartment building comes into view, modern architecture that houses traditional values, choosing each other daily, creating beauty from available ingredients, practicing love with the same intentionality they bring to teaching, cooking, and building programs that change lives one family recipe at a time. Thank you, Janelle says as they climb the stairs to their floor. For what? For being willing to practice with me. For choosing growth over comfort, partnership over independence, love that requires work over convenience that demands nothing. Thank you, Min-jae responds, for teaching me that vulnerability is strength, that sharing your story makes you more powerful, that some forms of nourishment can't be planned or controlled, only received with gratitude when they appear. The conversation ends with gentle kisses and the quiet satisfaction of another day spent building something beautiful together. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to practice the love they've learned to create, rather than simply stumble into. But tonight, there's wine to share, stories to exchange, and the extraordinary ordinariness of two people who found their way home to each other, one carefully chosen ingredient at a time. Epilogue. 5 years later, the wedding takes place in their Chicago backyard garden, where Korean perilla grows beside southern collard greens, where cardamom plants thrive next to gochujang peppers, where fusion happens naturally rather than artificially. It's their second wedding. The first was a courthouse ceremony for legal purposes, practical and efficient and completely lacking in romance. This ceremony celebrates 5 years of successful partnership, the kind of commitment that's been tested through daily life rather than promised in hypothetical future. Dorothy, now 83, sits in the front row wearing a hanbok that Min Jae's grandmother sent from Seoul, cultural exchange made tangible through fabric and ceremony. Ji-hoon, now running 3 restaurants in Seoul's growing food scene, serves as Min Jae's best man. Doctor. Sarah Kim, surprisingly, has become one of Janelle's closest friends. Their initial professional tension transformed into mutual respect and genuine affection. The vows they exchange are practical rather than romantic, acknowledging what they've learned about love through practice rather than theory. I promise to keep choosing you, Janelle says, even when you leave dishes in the sink, even when you question my cornbread techniques, even when success makes our lives more complicated rather than easier. I promise to keep growing with you, Min Jae responds. To support your dreams without losing my own. To practice vulnerability without using it as weapon or shield. To build something together that serves the world rather than just ourselves. The reception features dishes created by their students from around the world. Fusion cuisine that honors tradition while creating new possibilities. Food that tells stories of courage and creativity, and the willingness to share family recipes with strangers who become community. But the evening's most meaningful moment comes when Dorothy stands to make a toast, her voice carrying across the garden filled with international guests. My great-niece asked me what I've learned from watching her build this life with Min Jae, she says, raising her glass of Korean rice wine. And I told her, I learned that love is like good cooking. It requires the best ingredients you can find, patience with the process, willingness to adjust seasoning as you go, and the understanding that some dishes improve with age. The applause is gentle, appreciative, the kind that recognizes wisdom earned through observation and experience rather than academic study. As evening settles over Chicago, as guests help clean dishes and share leftover food and exchange contact information for future collaborations, Janelle and Min Jae find themselves alone in their garden, surrounded by plants that represent their ongoing fusion experiment. No regrets? Min Jae asks, the question they've asked each other annually since that first uncertain decision to work together. Only that it took us both so long to find each other, Janelle responds, the answer that's become their traditional response. What's next? More practice, more students, more opportunities to prove that healing happens in community, that love grows stronger when it includes other people, that some traditions are worth preserving exactly as they are, while others benefit from creative adaptation. And personally, Janelle looks around their garden, at soil enriched by compost from their kitchen scraps, at plants that represent multiple continents and cultural traditions, at space they've created for both solitude and hospitality. Personally, I want to keep building this life with you. Keep learning to practice love with the same intentionality we bring to teaching and cooking and creating programs that matter. Keep choosing each other, not because it's easy, but because it's worth the effort. Min Jae pulls her closer, their bodies finding the rhythm they've developed over years of learning to move through life together. Above them, Chicago's skyline glitters with promises and possibilities. But in their small garden, two people have discovered that home isn't a place you find. It's something you create with someone willing to build it alongside you, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one carefully seasoned dish at a time. The practice of love continues, as reliable as daily bread, as essential as shared meals, as beautiful as fusion cuisine that honors its sources while creating something entirely new. If you've been moved by Janelle and Minjae's journey from professional colleagues to life partners, subscribe to our channel for more stories about second chances, cultural bridges, and love that's built through practice rather than discovered through accident. Their story proves that the best relationships aren't found. They're created through daily choices, shared vulnerabilities, and the courage to grow together rather than apart.